Manx Radio Podcasts, powered by Shaw.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Sponsoring Women Today, citywing.com for business or leisure flights.
You are listening to Women Today. It's just coming up to 25 minutes past 2.
Well, I met with the lovely Sam Shakespeare, who is psychotherapist and has a degree in occupational therapy and a master's degree in cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT. We had a long chat about anxiety, and in the interview she refers to an organisation called NICE, which, for clarification, is the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, and they provide national guidance and advice to improve health and social care. I started the interview by asking her what triggers anxiety.
It's a difficult one, really, but I would say in my experience as a therapist, it tends to be two things. So one can be quite a pivotal event in someone's life, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in their childhood. For instance, it could be a car crash, it could be a broken relationship, it could be an abuse situation where someone is neglected or verbally abused. So you can start to work through how you deal with that situation there and then, and you develop a coping strategy. But it can also be something that has happened in childhood, and again, it doesn't have to be something that is huge and massive, like a big situation. It can be something quite neutral that somebody has appraised in a certain way. So it's not necessarily the event itself, it's how they appraise it, it's the meaning that they attach to it. And also the way that they change their behaviour as a result of it. So if you put all of those three things together, you've got your thinking, you've got your emotional side, which can affect your mood, and you've got your behavioural side as well. So if you put all of those together, that in essence is what anxiety is.
But so it sounds like that we're all vulnerable and we could all suffer from a bout of anxiety throughout our lives. Is there anything that we could do to prevent it?
Preventing anxiety is not possible because it's part of a primitive response system. You cannot stop being anxious. You've got to have it there. It's like your alarm system, so you've got to have it. The best way to deal with it is to learn how to manage it in a more helpful way. So it's not that you can stop it, it's that when you get it, you can train yourself to manage it in a more helpful way.
When I'm weak, I draw strength from you. And when you're lost, I know how to change your mood.
Okay, so we now have an understanding a bit more of what anxiety is, what some of the triggers may be or may have been. So how can it be treated?
Okay, so we've got, as well as going through your GP and seeking private practitioners, you can also discuss medication with your GP, although NICE would recommend that you have a talking therapy before you go for a medication sort of response to it. Your typical talking therapies are CBT, counselling, mindfulness. You can go for group therapy, art therapy, but also self-help books can be useful for some people. Again, it's finding the right medium for the individual. I don't mean medium in a ghostly way. There are online websites, so Mood Juice is a good one. Also mind.org. They're a big organisation in the UK. They have a wealth of information on anxiety and different groups that you can subscribe to, so forums, self-help groups that people can join up and discuss anxiety. My only word of caution with that, given my experience of speaking with a couple of clients, is that sometimes in some of these groups people will talk about their anxiety but not how they're moving away from it or dealing with it in a helpful way. It's almost like a self-fulfilling thing. It just goes round and round and round. So there's just a word of caution with online forums where people sort of almost gravitate and then discuss how awful things are, not what can we do about this, what do we need to do about this to stop feeling so awful. So that's my word of caution. Cognitive behavioural therapy is essentially looking at how you think and feel and how you behave, because I think we'd say it's accepted that how you think and feel can affect how you behave, and how you behave can affect how you think and feel. So it's kind of a very cyclic process. So in CBT, we're looking at your thinking, we're looking at your beliefs, we're looking at your values, we're looking at your morals, We're looking at your thoughts. So it's everything to do with how you process information. That's the cognitive bit. The behavioural bit is your responses. It's the things that you do. It's the way that you act. It's the things that you say. So in anxiety, if you feel like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst anxiety ever. So if you see a spider on the floor and you feel like anxious to a level of 10 and you start to think, I can't cope, it's going to do something to me, and you try and run out of the nearest door, which is probably shut, and then you start wrangling with the door handle, that's probably not helpful. So in CBT, what we would get you to do is perhaps work on downgrading your sensitivity to it, but we'd also have to get, again, I've talked about this appraising of a situation, appraising of an event. It's how you're thinking about it. It's the meaning that you attach to it. So we'd start to sort of like, if you imagine a detective investigating all these different things and then look at more helpful ways that you can deal with the situations. I would say that a lot of people come in to see me and they'll talk about things that actually cannot be changed. You know, it's the thing that isn't pleasant, and literally the thing cannot be changed. So what we need to do is look at the strategies to deal with the situation, to find more helpful strategies that will work longer term, rather than the immediate, I do this thing, I get away, and the anxiety drops down really quickly. It's all about long-term strategies.
If someone is listening to this and they think they might be suffering from anxiety themselves, or they might know someone who is, what would you say to them?
The first thing I would say to anyone is find somebody that you trust, find a friend that's really helpful, and sit down and talk it through with them. Because sometimes you don't need to go all the way down the line to go and see your GP and have your worries and concerns pathologized. You can sit down with someone and just check what you're going through, because a lot of the time when people experience anxiety, they think that if they say it out loud, somebody will think they're stupid, so they hold on to it and they don't talk about it. And the one thing I want people to take from it is don't hold things in, talk and share. That's why we have talking therapy, so people can express. If that doesn't help, do go and see your GP, your doctor, and ask them to refer you on. You can go through the community mental health team, and you can ask the doctor to refer you to that team, and then they will grade your problem, and they will sort of pass you on to the appropriate team. So there's a low intensity therapy team, there's me who's a CBT therapist, there are clinical psychologists, there are practitioner psychologists, there's a whole ream of people, there are mental health nurses, and all of those people have expertise, and lots of them have expertise in CBT. It's a nice recommended therapy for depression and anxiety because it has the biggest base of evidence to support its use and its usefulness.
We are speaking to an award-winning innovator of the online gaming industry. In fact, she's a bona fide star of the future. I love that title. Lydia Barbara, thank you for taking time to join us today. You are a star of the future. That's a pretty cool title to have.
I was really flattered to get that award, actually. Thank you for having me today. I'm really looking forward to today's segment.
To start with, I have to ask you, gaming industry then, not just for guys, clearly.
Clearly, if I'm in it. Also, one would imagine that quite a large part of our user base is also female, considering that we're half of the world's population. So yes, gaming is a technology field, and so it is naturally a bit male-dominated, but that is getting better year after year. And
what do you think that women bring to the industry?
I think that women bring all sorts of things to the industry. We are, it's hard to say sometimes because women have a lot to bring to all sorts of industries. We are just as smart as men. We're just as capable as men. And I think that what we can bring is a unique perspective at times.
Yes, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right there. Now, people will notice that's not a Manx accent there. Where are you from originally, Lydia?
Oh, I'm from the States originally, although I have lived here for the past 7 years.
And what brought you over here?
The job. I was recruited by Microgaming to come and work here in the poker part of the industry specifically. And before that, I was actually living in Malta for 4 years. So I've been away from the States for a good long time.
And you've actually travelled a lot, haven't you? We ask all of our guests to send us a sort of bit of background about themselves, like a biography, sort of potted biography. And I love that there's a couple of lines in there that I really like. One in particular, you say, living abroad has shaped who I am. In what way has it shaped you, do you think?
I think that if I was still living in the States, if I was still living in Atlanta, Georgia, I would be possibly a different sort of person. When I was looking at moving into poker and moving into the gaming industry, I basically had two options. I was going to either move into real estate, and this was right before the real estate crash, so I'm really glad I didn't, or I could have moved abroad and joined the poker industry, and I'm really, really glad that I did. I feel that working in an industry that's as multicultural as mine has made me understand a little bit more and be a bit more understanding of how people in different cultures work and how they interact and communicate with one another. And it's definitely opened my mind to new experiences and broadened my horizons.
So how did you get interested in poker, though? Because it's, again, I don't like sort of separating men and women because I think that almost goes against the whole idea of equality. But at the same time, it's not seen as being a very female pursuit.
It's not, which is really a shame because it's one of those sports in which women can absolutely compete on equal footing with men. And yet sometimes women are a little bit slower to join the game.
But there are clearly risks involved as well, because as soon as you add that sort of monetary aspect to it, yes, you can win. You can also lose, and you can lose quite a lot, obviously. But so how do you manage those risks?
So I managed it through really careful bankroll management. So I would have, it's so boring. I would play 8 hours a day, and I would have a spreadsheet, and I'd have my starting balance and my ending balance, and I would keep record through there's sort of database tracking software. I'd keep record of all of the hands played, and I'd review everything after all the sessions to see where I would make mistakes, and I'd go back and I'd try to correct those mistakes. And it's like any sort of field. You require constant learning and constant vigilance. I think that the poker world then, it was a lot easier to be slightly better than average and make a living out of it. Right now, the game has gotten a lot harder for a lot of different reasons. I think that anyone starting out in poker right now can expect to lose money for a long time before they're good enough, before they're experienced enough to start making money at it.
Tell us about the Women in Gaming Awards. What is that all about?
So the Women in Gaming Awards, it's something that's held in the gaming industry. It's an annual award series. I won an award this past year for Innovator of the Year, and the year before that as Star of the Future. And it's something that's very specific to the online gaming industry. It is international. It was quite an honor to take home an award this year and last year. And it's something where, we were talking about this a little bit before the show. I'm a little bit conflicted when it comes to women-only events because I wish that they weren't necessary. Mm-hmm. And I feel that sometimes part of me feels that maybe they're not necessary and that women should not be singled out as being worthy of a particular award or things like that. But at the same time, I feel like if it accomplishes something, if it accomplishes that women are recognized for their achievements, then it's worthwhile. Although there is something about it that really makes me wish that it wasn't. So to use an example, I believe I got the award this year because a patent that I applied for was granted, and it's for something poker related. It's complicated and financial, and it was something that was a lot of fun to work on. But I've since found out that only 5.5% of commercialized patents are issued to women.
Wow!
And this is one area in which women could step up. And there's no reason why women shouldn't be putting forth their ideas as patents and then making money on them. And it's one of those areas in which I really hope that being able to talk about this and having Innovator of the Year awards through even just women type award series would hope to highlight this, because it's a discrepancy that we can fix.
And is that do you mean patents with regards to any kind of industry and genre? Is that just all patents? There's only that or do you mean in the gaming industry itself?
No, generally it's
Wow.
commercialized patents. So it's patents that people are actually, have taken to market and are making money on. It's only 5.5%.
We need to have some ideas, Nicola.
I need to get creative. Yeah.
I think we can do that. Now, coming back to poker, I should say we have had a text message in. I thought we may actually. I'm just going to read it to you here. It came in before because we were talking about poker. Now, Malcolm says poker's not a sport. He says it's gambling and people have become destitute because of this. And, the Isle of Man has become somewhat of a big name in the world of online gaming. And I'm sure you've had some sort of negative comments in the past about it. And I wonder how you deal with that.
So we have, and yes, people have become destitute. People have become destitute by setting up their own businesses or trading stocks on the stock market. A lot of the things that we do in our day-to-day lives can be considered gambling. I think that poker is difficult because we are, perhaps as a marketing thing, but we talk about poker as something where you can make money at it. But you make money at it through a lot of hard work and study and diligence and careful bankroll management. And it's not necessarily something where I'd encourage someone to start playing professionally immediately, or even after a long period. It's something that really requires a lot of thought. And I think that a lot of people are negative with poker because it is seen as a form of gambling. I strongly believe that it's actually a sport and that it is a skill game. And I think that we can see that because we see the same people winning over and over again. And if it was something that was pure gambling, then we wouldn't see that. But we see the same top players around the world all the time. And that just goes to show to me that it is a skill game and it is a sport.
So is it still the same as it was traditionally? Does it still have those same sort of, as a card game played around a table, when you take it into the online world, is it the same thing?
Yes, and that's super interesting because it doesn't have to be. So what we have done with online poker is we've taken a card game and basically moved it online, and graphically it's the same. I think that there have been a number of innovations over the years that have moved away from the offline portrayal of it. Things like Rush Poker, which was introduced by Full Tilt, which is something that you can't play live. Now, anyone who's listening to this and knows a little bit about online poker will be following, and I'm sorry if anyone else is a bit lost on this. It's a type of poker that basically can only be played online.
Okay.
There are also certain things like Blazing Cannon, which we at Microgaming have released, that it could not be done live. And I think that over time, the game of poker online is going to evolve to look less and less like the game that some of us grew up playing around a kitchen card table.
Now, our studio guests today are from the charity Pause for Therapy. We have Mary Sims with us and her husband Ian. Thank you very much for joining us today. We also, as you might have heard, some sort of rustling in the background, we have Danny the dog with us. Beautiful Danny too, who is one of the Pause for Therapy dogs. We'll be finding out a little bit more about what Danny does with Pause for Therapy and finding more about the charity in general a little bit later on, which does, of course, as you might have guessed, the charity revolves around the benefits of being around animals. Now, Mary, you had an experience of the benefits of animals, didn't you, from a very, very young age? You were telling us in your bio about when you were first going to school.
Absolutely, yes. I was bought my first ever dog for my 5th birthday, a little Cocker Spaniel called Snooky, and she was just adorable. And I was 5 in the August and started school a couple of weeks after in early September, and I was petrified. I really did not want to go. And I remember my mum and dad driving me to school, and Snooky was only a tiny little puppy sat on my dad's knee, and obviously that completely distracted me. And I was oblivious to the fact of where we were going, really. Potted into school. Obviously she was too young to go on the ground at that stage. She hadn't had all the jabs, but my dad carried her in his arms. And I walked along quite happily. I think Dad actually took her into school with me. And then settled me down, and I stayed there quite happily for the rest of the day. So yeah, that's basically what we're about as a charity, using the dogs, for want of a better expression, as a distraction, as a therapy, because a lot of people, a huge amount of people are animal lovers, and if we've suitable animals to be able to share, then it's a privilege to be able to take them to people who aren't in such a fortunate position.
There is just something about animals, isn't there, being around them, especially dogs. I don't know, there's just something. Would you say there is something about dogs in particular that they have that sort of calming effect on people?
I think whatever your bag is for animals, some people are dogs, some people are cats, some people are gerbils, rabbits, whatever. We only at the moment take dogs because that's what we're set up to do. Mm-hmm. Whatever animal it is clinically proven that they do reduce blood pressure, they help to divert negative thoughts, and as I say, they're as much as anything a distraction or a reminder to people. A lot of the places we go are nursing homes where people obviously are no longer able to have their own animals but have had in previous years. And often we'll find people in floods of tears, but they're actually happy tears because they'll spend half an hour reminiscing to us about their dogs, cats, whatever it will be. And they'll just be sat there stroking the dog, telling us all the animals that they've had over the years, telling us their names, the little anecdotal stories and all this sort of thing. And and it's just a bit of normality that comes in to see them on a regular basis every couple of weeks or so, and it just helps to break, their one day from another for them.
And for the dogs, I suppose, a human is a human is a human, and so they don't. Do they pretty much sort of react in a similar way with whoever they meet? They're obviously trained, aren't they? Or that they're going to be dogs that are appropriate to be in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. There is no specific training. The only requirement we have is that they must have been owned for at least 6 months by the people who are taking them in, and that's really so that the owner knows how the dog's likely to behave. The dogs are assessed by ourselves to make sure they are of suitable temperament and attitude. They need to be sociable, obviously, because they're approaching complete strangers. They have to be fairly, just well-rounded dogs that will not get fazed by any given situation, whether it's screaming children or a fire alarm going off or a rattling Zimmer frame or whatever it is. The dogs just need to be able to take it all in their stride, not bat an eyelid at it. We do within the assessment tests just to make sure that they aren't going to be too reactive to loud noises and stuff like that. But yeah, we just really look for dogs that are sociable, happy to be around anybody. Obviously, they're not too boisterous. We don't want them jumping up all over people because particularly elderly, they're very fragile, they have very delicate skin. But the dogs just want to go and say hello to everybody, and it's just a privilege to be able to share them with people, and the dogs just love it because often they'll get given little treats, of course. People are often sat drinking coffee or tea and having a little biscuit, and the dogs just love to have a little bit of biscuit given to them, which is actually another part of the assessment that we do to make sure they will take a treat gently, and we're not going to find somebody they started with 5 fingers and they've now got 4. Probably the most common question we are asked is, which is the best breed of dog for paws for therapy? And the answer to that is there is no right or wrong breed. It's purely down to the attitude and the temperament of the dog. You can get good collies and bad collies, good spaniels, bad spaniels, good rotties, bad rotties, good staffies, bad staffies. Obviously the dog and the temperament of the dog is paramount. But the 99.9% of the bad press is down, I suspect, to the circumstances and the lack of responsibility of the owners, which is just so unfair. It's a bit like when owners don't pick up after their dogs. We all get tarnished with the same brush, and nobody wants to stand in dog muck. And if you're not prepared to pick up, then don't have a dog. That's all there is to it.
And you've brought in some kit with you. Now tell us what this kit is.
That's right, yes. It's oxygen masks for animals, not just dogs, not just cats. It can cater for gerbils, guinea pigs, budgerigars, any number of animals. The primary thing that we were looking for was to cover animals that have been caught in a house fire, and once they've been recovered by the fire service, they're overcome by the effects of smoke. They have smoke inhalation, and apparently what will often happen is that because the fire service aren't kitted out with these shapes of masks, they only have masks suitable for human faces, which are quite flat, so they aren't very effective on the animals, and a lot of the oxygen will just escape rather than actually get them into the animal's lungs. These masks are cone shaped. There's 3 different sizes, and it means that emergency first aid oxygen can be administered to these animals, and very likely they will be revived, and then obviously they can be taken to a vet's or whatever needs to happen to them. But it's that initial emergency first aid that is the critical lifesaver. To be in a situation where you've got a house fire, you've potentially lost or had damaged your home, to then find that your animals are brought out by the fire service, they're still alive, but they're unconscious because they've had so much smoke intake, and then they go and die in front of you. It would just be beyond comprehension. I mean, the trauma of a house fire, we can speak from personal experience, is not fun. It's not a nice place to be. But the prospect of then losing your animals is just beyond comprehension. 46% of households in the UK own pets. I suspect it's far more than that on the island. I bet it's well over half of the households.
Do you think we are a nation of animal
lovers?
lovers?
Absolutely, no question about it, yeah. And to be honest, the response we've had, we only launched this last Saturday, so just over a week, and the response has been phenomenal.
You have Dr. John with us, and also his son Oliver, who's also training need to be a GP. And we're talking about those sort of old-fashioned illnesses like the likes of, you know, the scarlatina or smallpox, that kind of thing, that maybe people think, oh, surely they're not around anymore. But when you have kids, these things do kind of crop up, don't they? Okay, here's one for you. Smallpox. Is that the same thing as either measles or chickenpox, or is that something entirely different?
No, smallpox is much more serious illness, and that is now eradicated. We don't see smallpox anymore. There are viruses in a laboratory somewhere, but we don't want to let them out. So no, smallpox is generally not around at all anymore, thank goodness. There are other conditions like sort of polio, mumps and measles, which all mums will have heard of, and dads as well, I hope, which are rarer but actually still around. And those are the ones that we vaccinate for. So when your baby is very small, we give them a tiny dose of either the dead virus or an attenuated, in other words, a harmless virus, in order to promote your immune system to fight against it should it actually hit you. So that's why the vast majority of the population is now free, because, of course, very few people are getting it. The problem is that, of course, we've had a little bit of a hiccup in the last few years because of the MMR scare. And so MMR is measles, mumps and rubella, German measles. And so there have been some increased instances of that because a lot of parents have become quite scared about actually giving the vaccine.
Wow, and I suppose you're going to have obvious thoughts on this, is that obviously the children should have this vaccine, but it's interesting that we were talking before about how something like this can become such a scare, and it does seem like it's the media sort of taking this and potentially blowing it out of proportion. I don't know, but at the same time, when it's your children, you are going to be concerned about anything you hear, aren't you? Because you just want to do the best for the child at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Ollie and I were talking about this earlier on. You've done some research, I think, haven't you?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the main reasons that certainly the MMR vaccine was kind of so controversial back in, well, it started in 1998, this chap, doctor called Andrew Wakefield, did a piece of research which was published, and then the media got hold of this, which tried to, or claimed to link the MMR vaccine to autism, which is completely rubbish. Has since been completely kind of said that it is rubbish, and that it was a massive mistake. The guy has since been struck off and is no longer allowed to practice medicine, not only because the research itself was very poor and caused such a scare, but also there was a conflict of interest, and he was paid something like 450 grand from some company, drug company, to do with it all. And so, but as Dad said earlier, it did have a big effect on things like measles and mumps coming back a few years later, as lots of mums chose not to vaccinate their children. But obviously our advice now, and anywhere that you read online with good research, will tell you that is the right thing to do vaccinate, and there is no link.
Yeah, I suppose. Okay, so we were talking just before about smallpox and chickenpox, and there is such a thing, I believe, Nicola, you brought this up, pox parties.
Well, yeah, I've got two questions actually, with because chickenpox is, and any mum or dad listening to this who's got small children is probably aware that I think there's some chickenpox doing the rounds on the Isle of Man at the moment. Pox parties used to be popular. I don't know if they still are. So my first question is, do you think pox parties are a good idea? My second question is, I don't know if you've seen it on social media, but there is an awful picture of a child who had chickenpox who was given ibuprofen, and that has led to some awful effects left on the skin, and so it's out there on social media that if you have a child who's got chickenpox, whatever you do, don't give them ibuprofen if they've got a temperature.
Okay, first one, pox parties still happen. They're not talked about a great deal. What's even more interesting is that there is some talk on the media in America about children being sent ice lollies with the virus in it by post, and you can actually order them on the internet in order to deliberately infect your child.
And would that work?
The reason behind this is that the vast majority of children who get chickenpox very early on in their life get a few spots, feel a bit coldy, get better. So the thought is, why don't we do that now while they're little, and then they'll be okay? Because undoubtedly, if you get chickenpox when you're an adult, it's bad news. It's horrid. You know, you have a really nasty rash very often. You feel ghastly for a couple of weeks. And you can have more complications, particularly chest infections. The problem is, and what people don't realise, is that although most young children are fine and only have a minor illness, it is still pretty dangerous. You know, chickenpox can make you feel very unwell. You can be hospitalised. There is this condition called encephalitis, where you can actually get a brain disease as a result of chickenpox. It is rare, but you can get it. More commonly, you can get a nasty chest infection afterwards, which will be quite difficult to eradicate. So some children are hospitalised, and some children die. You know, it is possible. There have been deaths every year to do with chickenpox. So it's not a risk that I would consider worth taking when you've got, good treatments. So, no, please don't spread chickenpox around. As far as ibuprofen is concerned, it's one of those stories that get out on the media that gets blown up. We are not advised to use ibuprofen and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like naproxen or diclofenac, all of those sort of things, in people with chickenpox. There are very unusual cases of people being very ill, particularly, as you've said, with rashes that get very much worse. But it's very, very rare. Mm-hmm. So it's not something we would call a complete contraindication. In other words, you can give it, but you have to recognise that it is a risk and keep a very close eye. I wouldn't choose to. There are other painkillers around.
So if we want to find out more information about all of these things, is it best to just go to the NHS website? Or
NHS Choices is probably the best website. It's actually got a very good section both on the illness is concerned and what you can expect to see if your child has measles, mumps, rubella, any of those sort of things.
Because a lot of them involve rashes and skin
A lot of them do,
so,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
My general point with rashes, incidentally, is the rash itself is probably less important than how your child is. If I see a child at meds or in my surgery, I'm generally less interested in looking at the rash and more interested in looking at the child. Have they got a high temperature? Have they been off their food? Are they vomiting? Do they have a nasty cough? Any of those things are probably more important than the rash. But go to NHS Choices, really good website to look at both the illnesses but also the vaccinations and the relative risks and benefits. Bottom line is they're incredibly powerful and they work really well and they don't make your child ill. They give him a sore arm for a few days. Please have them.
I put a nickel in the telephone, dial my baby's number, got a busy life.
O2 asked me to inspect these phones that were bought online. Now, there was over 50 of them, and they were bought at various different auction sites, etc. Now, they all came through. They were bought randomly. And when I went through them, I was shocked at some of the things we found. I'll give you an example, Christy, of some of the things that I came across. 2/3 of them were falsely advertised. They weren't what they said they were. And on a couple of occasions, there were actually old model phones that had been put into newer versions cases. I mean, that's blatantly, bad, isn't it? Over a third of them were broken, including things like the camera's not working, or the camera lenses being cracked, or the buttons not working, etc. 10% of them wouldn't charge. A couple of them arrived, and the photos in the advert looked quite good, but they only showed you one photo from the front, and when they arrived, they didn't even have a back on them. Half of them, they were far too badly battered to be resold, and 3/4 of them were no good. I mean, you would be very, very unhappy with them.
Oh my word, that's shocking. And if you do get one of these phones that is in such a bad condition and not as advertised, what happens? Can you actually send it back, or are you done for?
Well, that depends where you bought it from. Now, a couple of auction sites will give a buyer protection if you do your homework correctly, if you make sure that who you're buying from is someone who's a protected seller. If it's been falsely advertised or anything else, they will then go after the person and ask for a refund on your behalf. But what a lot of people don't realise is there's quite a few well-known auction sites out there that the way they operate is they put a seller and a buyer together, and that's it. There is zero comeback. And on those occasions, we've actually heard about people buying a phone. The seller, once they've received the money, shuts their advert down, disappears. They don't even send anything through. You've totally lost everything, and you've got no recourse when that happens at all. So it is a case of, I would say to people, I have this saying, if you smell a rat, you're probably dealing with one. Use your common sense. If something's not quite right, if you're still interested in the phone, I wouldn't say necessarily dismiss it immediately, but if something's not quite right, just be show more due diligence. Try and meet the seller, try and inspect the phone, try and make sure it's working, or if you can't see them, try and get a photograph of the phone from every angle, not just the front or the back. Try and get a name and address and a contact number for the person who's selling it, and see if they give you any sort of warranty on it. If not, then you need to be really, really cautious. I suppose the ideal answer here, Christy, is if you can afford it, buy a second-hand phone from a high street retailer, one that's been checked, comes with a warranty, and you've got some sort of guarantee. The shop are who they say they are, and the phone's been checked, and it's not stolen or not fake.
I guess that's the thing, isn't it? But what sort of price difference then are you looking at in between going to a high street retailer and getting one of these online?
Well, the funny thing is, one of the phones that we got off the website, it was a used phone. It came through and it was £269, so it wasn't cheap. And you'd think if you're paying a lot of money, well, it must be a fairly good, fairly modern phone. It came through, it wasn't. It was broken. It had all sorts of issues with it. And it makes you realise that the price doesn't necessarily mean you're getting a good phone. Now, obviously, the cheaper it's going to be, it's probably there's more chance of things not working on it. But it still ideally needs to be advertised. I mean, people don't mind buying something cheap if it says no charger, no battery, or camera doesn't work. At least you're not being missold something. The problem here is people are advertising them, they're getting as much money as they can, and 3/4 of what arrives are not what people wanted.
Now, what about if we are looking at these auction sites online? There are some of them, aren't there, where they do have feedback from previous buyers who can rate the seller. I mean, is it even worth looking at those? Could that be faked?
Well, it's not so much faked. I mean, it depends how many people they've got reporting on their feedback. If it's one or two, then it's probably their mum and their brother. But if you get somebody who goes on one of these sites and they buy and sell things regularly, and they've got a very good percentage, lots and lots of people have recommended them, and quite often some of the websites will protect the seller and say, this person is who they say they are, then you're fairly okay. You should have some sort of recall if something goes wrong. If there's other sites out there, obviously I can't mention names, Chrissy, but we've all heard of other sites. And if you go on there, there's no sort of feedback, no guarantee, no recall, then it is buyer beware. And according to this study and what I found is most of the time, the majority of the time, what you're getting is you're going to be unhappy with.
And, judging by this, I think it's 73% of us are actually doing this. So why are we going? Is it just to save money?
Well, quite often, I mean, there's this thing which I say, and greed conquers brains. And that happens in everything I've ever done. In all the consumer programs I've done, you say to people, why on earth did you do that? And they say, well, it just seems so cheap. I thought it was a bargain, And greed does conquer brains. We think we're getting something that's so cheap. Come on, guys, wake up and smell the roses. It's cheap for a reason. It doesn't exist. You're going to get your fingers burnt. Something's going to go wrong, But again, it might not be cheap, So you just got to be very, very careful.
And it's so typical because I have literally just a few days ago bought one of these phones from an online site. So I'm really intrigued now to know what I'm going to get turning up. I have a feeling I'm going to be probably kicking myself and then going to a proper retailer instead after what you've said.
I'm gathering by that it hasn't arrived yet.
Not yet.
Okay. Did you check the person that was selling it to you?
Well, I did. I went for one of those ones that was more of a sort of shop-fronted seller rather than just an individual. And it did have lots of good feedback. So I'm really hoping it's okay.
Well, I'll keep my fingers crossed for you, Chris. But at least you have done something fairly sensible. I mean, I would always say to people, if you can afford it, buy from a high street retailer for obvious reasons. If you can't, well, there's a few things to watch out for. I mean, some people advertise a phone and they show you a stock photo, one which they pulled off the internet. Here's my phone, this is the one I'm selling. Hang on, straight away, wake up and smell the roses. Why are they showing you a stock photo? Make sure people are showing you the actual phone, every single angle, not just the front or the back, and not just a distant shot of them using it 400 metres away. Make sure you get a good picture of it. Do your checks on the seller, or if you can afford it, go and get one from a reliable source, one where you've got a comeback and a warranty on it as well.
It does make you wonder how many people are actually buying new phones now, because I suppose they do sort of go out of fashion or out of style or out of tech quite quickly now, don't they?
Well, that's exactly why O2 are doing this thing called Like New. What they're doing is they're selling 3 classes of phones. You get the first class, which is perfect. Now, they're phones that have been returned to them. And what they do is they check them out, they wipe all the data, but they're never more than 14 days old, and you're buying them at a discounted price. Pretty good. Then they do one called Almost Perfect, which is up to 3 months old. They might have up to 5 small marks on them, but everything's checked, everything's working, and they've got a guarantee. And then they do one called it's called Perfectly Fine, which is any age phone. But it's checked, it's made sure it's working, it's made sure the data's cleared off it. And these are very cheap phones. And the reason they're doing those, and this is something which a lot of people need, you've probably heard stories where people are in a contract, quite often 2-year contracts now, which I hate with a vengeance, but they lose or they break their phone and they're stuck in that contract and they need to get a cheap phone just to see them to the end of it. And these are perfect for that. So that's what I would recommend.
And of course, there's the whole new Pokemon Go craze, taking the world by storm, and people are actually embracing it now as a very, very positive thing. I mean, there's a thing in a rehabilitation centre in Florida. They're using the app to help work on movement, standing, balance and tolerance, hand-eye coordination, problem solving, impulse control and fine motor skills. They say it encourages interactions with others, which can be highly motivating to patients. Doctors have seen a marked improvement in the excitement level of the patients playing the game. They now want to go to rehab sessions because they want to play play Pokemon, and they're seen walking down the halls with their therapist, laughing and shouting, "I got one," which I think is just brilliant. And then they're motivated to walk further down the hallway to see if they can find where the next Pokemon is hiding. I just think that's brilliant. And there's loads of stories about Pokemon Go being beneficial in all kinds of ways, socialising, fighting anxiety, depression too. Lydia, what do you make of all of this? The idea of kind of embracing video games and using them in either a sort of way to encourage or motivate people to get outside, or to, you know, sort of develop brain power, whatever in those respects.
So I think that there are a lot of different layers to this, especially Pokemon Go, that are really, really interesting. So there's something really cool about Pokemon Go that you haven't mentioned, which is how businesses are using it to attract new customers. So there are local businesses in the UK and in the US that are setting themselves up to be Pokestops, where people will come in looking for the resources they need to play Pokemon Go, and will stop and buy a coffee, or they'll buy a cupcake or something like that. It's turning out to be fantastic for local businesses who embrace the technology and who embrace the games. I think that also Pokemon Go is the first example that we've seen of augmented reality hitting the masses. Mm-hmm. And I think that augmented reality is just such a fascinating field. And I think that this is starting to show just a little bit of the potential. Now, I have to admit, I haven't played Pokemon Go myself. I'm one of the 100 million people who's downloaded the app, and I'm really looking forward to some spare time to go and hunt through the streets of Douglas for a Pokemon. But I haven't played it myself. But I have been reading about it because it's so cool, and I'm so interested in augmented reality and what it can do for us. And I think that as the technology progresses, we're going to start seeing augmented reality impacting our lives in really interesting and new ways, and possibly ways that we haven't even considered yet. So aside from gaming, that part of it I think is super interesting. I tend to think that games are good for people. I mean, I work in the gaming industry, so obviously I will think that, but I think that games are a very, very valid use of a person's spare time. I think that things like going outside or interacting with people, or learning new skills and problem solving, these are really good for the brain. And I think that as we're seeing people move away perhaps from television, which we know is not good for the brain, into things like this, which are immersive and interactive, and require just using a few more gray cells, I think that that's really good for the future and future generations.
And I suppose, as you say as well, it's also getting people outside, which has got to be a good thing, hasn't it? I know that, you know, I think I was talking to someone recently about the Pokemon on the island, and apparently there's loads of them around Tynwald, which is great, isn't it? Because if it gets you sort of going out to visit historical sites, or are people going to historical sites and not even looking up from their phones, and so not learning anything anyway? I don't know. Nicola, you've not played it yet either, have you?
Well, you're talking about Pokemon Go, and I've probably sat here with a very blank expression on my face. I've heard about it. I don't have the app. I don't really understand what it's about. You're obviously looking for something. That's fine. But the more I hear about it, the more curious I find I'm getting, and I'm probably going to go home tonight and download the app. And yeah, you'll probably see me wandering around and bumping into lampposts and stuff like that while I'm looking for these. Am I looking for Pokemon? Is that what I'm looking for? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, but I suppose people could get caught up in that. I do really appreciate Lydia's comments about how all this gaming can actually come with benefits.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's video games, as they sort of came through the 80s and all the rest of it, probably had a bit of bad press or a bad association, but now they could be a really useful tool.
Yeah.
Would be a shame if people are sat with their heads in their phones looking for Pokemon and not reading the plaque at the historical site and learning something about that. But I don't know, maybe gaming will somehow incorporate
the learning element
of the sites or something. Who knows what's around the corner?
Well, people are using games to teach things in all sorts of interesting ways. So the sort of the brain building game industry is a multi-million-dollar industry right now. There's a massive company called Lumosity in San Francisco that basically builds games to help improve your memory and your problem solving skills and your spatial recognition and things like that. And it's a really cool company that's run by a whole bunch of psychologists, so they know what they're doing. And then there are things like, there are new games. There's one called Codemancer, which teaches kids how to code. So cool. It's a game for basically toddlers that teaches them the very basic elements of software development. And I think using things like that are just fascinating. And when it comes to using games in schools, I think it's a very natural evolution of our interaction with games. And I think that it will help to shape the sorts of people that we'll need to lead us into the future. Because I think that our children and our children's world is going to look very, very different from ours.
Totally
and
different.
We need to prepare them for that as much as possible, and I think that games are a great way to do that.
We're also joined, of course, by Carly and Miles from Man Benham. How easy is it to set up a business on the Isle of Man, Carly?
It's really straightforward on the Isle of Man. So you might see someone comes in with an idea and they go, right, I want to start this business. So you chat through with them whether they want to start as a sole trader or as a partnership or a company. So after they've decided that, you just usually go through or someone, you have to sit down almost with a bit of piece of paper and a pen and think, right, what do I need? So you might need insurance, for example, to do whatever you want to do. Or you might need to be licensed by some format for doing that particular activity. And then you just need to chat through about where they're going to operate from. Has it got planning permission? Do you need a lease in place? So it sounds maybe a lot of things to think of, but it's a really easy process to go through. And it's exciting times as well, I think, on the island with this fund and things in place. So I think it's all good.
Do you think, Miles, that we are well placed? Because, of course, we have our own legislation in so many elements of business and sort of employment and that kind of thing as well. Do you think we're well placed to welcome new business over here?
Yeah, definitely. The Isle of Man's got such an opportunity now. I mean, the idea of the scheme, it's absolutely fabulous. It's going to create so many jobs. Because basically the people coming over from the UK with existing businesses, they're going to create jobs. There'll be people out there now who in a few years' time will be working for the new businesses. You got the existing people out here now who are in the Isle of Man. They may want to have the opportunity to get going with a small loan to open a shop or a small business they want to actually get going. So they can get that small loan, which they may not be able to do through the banks, and get that business established. Again, it's a small business. It will grow. It will create jobs. The unique advantage we have on the Isle of Man, which you've all got to work on and assist, well, the new government when it comes in, is remembering that on the Isle of Man, we've got our own parliament. We can create our own laws. So that's our unique advantage. So we can look at matters and think, right, what's best, what's good for the Isle of Man? And if we can come up with ideas that work, that aren't controversial, that the UK can live with, then that's the advantage we have, and that attracts people in, because we don't need to have the complications that they have in the UK or the extra laws, because we're only a small population. So we can create a business environment that's really, really competitive and makes it worthwhile jumping on that plane or jumping on the boat and having that little short trip to the Isle of Man, because when you get here, you know it's going to be a place where you can do business.
But there's quite a lot of sort of unknown at the moment, isn't there? Because, of course, we're not entirely sure how, for instance, Brexit's going to affect us as an island. And also, it's going to be all change when this election happens in September. So many new members of the Keys and a brand new chief minister and everything as well. So is now a good time to be looking to do this?
Definitely. It's opportunity. Brexit's an opportunity. You've got to be either... cup half empty, cup half full. I mean, it's basically it's positive. Every time there's a change, there's a potential for an opportunity. So it's a big opportunity for the Isle of Man. The election's coming along. We've had a great team in the past. They've got us to the stage. The economy's doing well for loads of years. So there's an opportunity for new people to come in. The younger generation have to have a go at some stage. And they can come in. They've seen the leaders do it before, so it can be pushed forward again, and we can keep that growth going in the Isle of Man and bring in new businesses.
Everyone's scared of something very different, whether it's something from people's childhood or something that they grow to fear, something psychological versus, something organic like the fear of spiders, or like I said, psychological, where it's the fear of having a loss of control. I think it's very different for everyone. A lot of fear is also based in a very fantastical realm as well. I think based on what we've seen from pop culture. Universal is the home of horror. The studio literally created the horror genre back in the 1920s with Frankenstein and Dracula and Wolfman. But even those characters were based on stories that existed, far before those films existed. So I think from a pop culture standpoint, stories have really driven fear and the types of characters that have been created. We play into that. We want to create and recreate a lot of these classic characters and a lot of contemporary things that are being offered in film and TV today.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because quite often with things that scare us on TV, as you mentioned, it's what you don't see, isn't it? Because our imaginations are pretty strong.
Absolutely. You look at a film like Jaws, the original Jaws. That film was completely about the ideal of the shark, and you rarely saw it in that movie until Act 3, when the boat is getting attacked. And it was about that kind of visceral knowledge of what the shark could do, not necessarily what it was doing. And a lot of horror films play into that. You look at a film that we're actually featuring this year in the event, The Exorcist. It was considered in '73 the scariest film of all time, primarily because it was the fear of the unknown, the fear of possession, the idea that innocence can be lost, which is not a character, it's a feeling, it's a motif. It's just remarkable what storytelling is able to do and how it can affect the individual based on what it presents, but also what you're bringing to it when you do view it or read it.
And do you think, with regards to the films that we watch and that scare us, have our tastes changed over the years? And are we actually more difficult to scare now?
I think there's definitely been an evolution, but I do believe that horror, it comes in waves, and sometimes back to simpler tactics seem to be always the most effective. You look at a film like Saw, which really changed the genre as far as what it was showing, but then you look at a film like The Exorcist or even The Conjuring from today, and how visceral it is, but on a psychological or a paranormal level. I think it evolves, and it does come in waves. Horror always seems to find its way back to its roots eventually, and really sticking with the tropes that really, really work, where it is the fear of the unknown, the fear of the dark, and the fear of what's around the corner, are always just these tactics that we can always kind of go back to and rely on.
And you mentioned earlier the idea that a lot of it goes right back to our childhood, and those elements that you just described there. You can imagine a kid being sort of scared in the dark in the bedroom. So is it just really a progression from that?
I believe so. It is remembering back in your childhood of waking up in the middle of the night and seeing that shadow across your wall, and did it move? When in fact it didn't, but your eyes play tricks on you, and your mind takes it to a place far beyond what it actually is. And that's something we play into during Halloween Horror Nights. We want to surround you in these environments that make you believe something horrific is happening, or that something could horrific happen to you, when in fact it's completely controlled, completely safe, but is able to place you in an environment that you would never typically find yourself in.
So dare I ask what happens on these nights, or is it going to give me nightmares?
Well, Halloween Horror Nights, it's a 30-night event, and we have what we call haunted mazes, where we surround the guests in their favorite horror brands. But at the same time, we do present a lot of new ideas and characters that our guests have never seen before. But we really want to bring to life a lot of well-known brands that people know and love, like The Walking Dead or The Exorcist, as I mentioned before. But it really is, the entire goal of the event is to not only present a really unique and fun Halloween party, but from the moment you step through the door, you are immersed and within a living horror film. That is what we want our guests to experience.
Oh gosh, I think I really would get nightmares. It's interesting how some of us are able to go into experiences, whether it's movies or whether it's, like you're talking about here, these sort of really involved games as such, and then also you've got theme park rides as well. Some people can just go and do these things and then walk away and leave them and laugh about them, and other people, and I would probably class myself in this, just can't let it go. It just sort of stays with you sometimes, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, and there's also there's a sense of accomplishment for people like yourself that are really apprehensive about doing an experience like this, but end up, finding the courage to actually go through with it. The satisfaction on the other side of that experience is immeasurable. There is this elation, an adrenaline rush that you were able to accomplish it and actually make it through. I find more often than not, most of our guests that experience the event would not consider themselves horror fans, but are a fan of the adrenaline rush that it provides.
And speaking of adrenaline rushes, when we look at the parks themselves, the Universal parks, you've got those massive theme rides, and some of those are based on, sort of slightly scary films. How do you actually translate those scares and fears into a ride?
Well, a ride or a haunted maze, it essentially is about what story do we want to tell based on what we're given. You look at a maze like The Walking Dead. Obviously, that show is about the survivors of a zombie apocalypse. For our guests, we want to place our guests into that role. They are the survivors, and they are then surrounded by the insurmountable odds of having to fend off this zombie horde. And that is what our guests experience when they walk through that maze. The environments and the feeling as if they are one surrounded by thousands of walkers. The perception of that,
And it's interesting you keep mentioning story, actually, because having a little bit of background in film as well, I would always say that unless you have a good story, the odd jump here and there and the odd bit of gore just isn't really going to make it for anyone, is it?
No, you're absolutely right. The story is the number one goal when we begin the creative process for any attraction at Universal. We want our guests to feel like they have a beginning, middle, and end, an acts 1, 2, and 3, just as if it was a 2-hour theatrical play versus a 3 to 4 minute theme park attraction. It is all about the characters and the emotional value we want you to leave with once you're done.
Well, I'm almost convinced, but I think I need someone to hold my hand.
Well, if you come out, give me a call. I'll be right there.
Oh, you superstar. So if any of us would like to go along to one of these things, where can we find out more?
All the information can be found at universalorlando.co.uk.
So you just got to jump on a plane first.
That's right.
Get over that phobia first and we'll be fine.
Women Today, brought to you by citywing.com for your next flight away.
Don't sit in the slow lane. Join the fast lane right now with Shaw's all-new Superfast Plus broadband. Enjoy more bandwidth, amazing speeds and the best value on the island from just £23.95 per month. So don't be left behind. Get a piece of the high-speed action with Superfast Plus broadband from Shaw. For details, visit our stores in Douglas, Ramsey and Port Erin or click shaw.com. Love being Shaw. Terms and conditions apply.